sponsor. Okay. Our forum sponsor, Mazer, Emerson and Boggio, a law firm specializing in elder law to meet the unique needs of an aging population. Most of you are familiar with Brenna Galvin, and she's been wonderful, and she has done and will continue to do events for us to help educate us on the nuances of the law as they refer to folks in our age group. Shift also hosts shift-ins on Saturday mornings. Thursday evenings, I'm going to pull from here in a moment because we're putting that on hold for the summer. But Saturday mornings from 8:30 to 10, part sharing a cup of coffee, part meeting a new friend, part networking, part sharing resources. Shift-ins are a lot of fun for people and pretty insightful and helpful for a lot of folks as well. Circles is essentially shift-ins on steroids, where we get together every other month, and it alternates between Saturdays and Tuesday evenings. Currently this month they're running on Saturdays. The next series will run in August on Tuesday afternoons. And trying to look here. That'll be in the evening, yes. So Circles meets 2 hours, one night for 3 weeks in a row, and can dive into some of life's deeper questions. They're all facilitated by very seasoned facilitators. And then we have our workshop and special events and forum series. Kind of a fun series we have coming up is an introduction to what's a normal brain aging. We all kind of wonder sometimes every time we can't find the keys or whatever it is we're looking for, why we walked into that room. This will be a really wonderful discussion that's going to go on as a series. In June, it's what's normal brain aging, and then in July, there's a 2-part series that will really get into what are the issues that impact brain health, positively, negatively. It's going to be really insightful and helpful. Our next month forum speaker is Jim Gambone, who's going to be speaking about how to refire your life again in this time of sort of life on hold, if you will, for a while. It'll be kind of nice to have some insights on how to sort of re-energize your life. And Jim is going to be demonstrating how anyone can find meaning in a period of transition. So it should be good timing for that sort of discussion. We also have interview and the resume from Tom Colosimo. So folks who are maybe thinking about going back to work, thinking about changing jobs, it's always good to brush the dust off an old resume and have things in order to prepare. Tom is a real expert at this. He works professionally with people to make sure that their resumes and presentations are, sort of up to speed and fresh. And then we have a fun event coming up. Chris Farrell from Minnesota and National Public Radio fame will be our presenter talking about the post-pandemic economy. So please stay in touch, stay with us. There'll be some really fun events coming up that we're really looking forward to. So.
And Bob, can you thank Land O'Lakes also for being our overall programming sponsor?
Oh, yes, I am so sorry. Land O'Lakes is a local-based farm cooperative, best known for their butter and really a number of other dairy-related products. Wonderful company, wonderfully supportive. One of our previous board members is their new and first director of, help me out here, I'm just blanking today.
Diversity and inclusion and
Yes.
strategic relationships.
Yes, that. I'm sorry, got lost there for a moment. Wonderful company, very insightful, very forward thinking, and they have become full sponsors of Shift events, and we are very grateful for them and hope that others will support them in return. But on to today's event. This is especially fun. I feel like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz pulling back the curtain today, because how often do we get to look behind the scenes, speak to the woman who actually created the film, and just get the insights on the behind the scenes, what occurred, what was learned, the personalities. I'm really excited about today. This is a first ever for Shift, and we're very honored to have this opportunity to share this film showing, and especially to have this conversation with director Sky Bergman. Sky is, this was her actually directorial debut, which I don't know anybody who hits it out of the park on the first shot out, but congratulations for that. Also, her fine artwork is included in the permanent collection in the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Seattle Art Museum, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, and the National Library of France in Paris. Her book, The Naked and the Nude Images from Sculpture series, including an introduction by Helene Pinet, curator of photography at the Rodin Museum in Paris. She has shot book covers for Random House and Farrar, Straus and Giroux, and magazine spreads that appeared in Smithsonian, Arthur Fromm's Budget Travel, Reader's Digest, and Archaeology Odyssey. A woman of many skills and talents, and fame, quite frankly. Sky is currently a professor of photography and video at Cal Poly State University in San Luis Obispo, California. And with no further ado, please take it away, Sky.
Thank you, Bob, for that amazing introduction. That was very nice, very sweet, very kind. I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking a chance and doing something a little bit different. I know that, you know, this is a completely different thing for you all to do a film and a screening. And so I appreciate in this virtual world, you're taking a chance on this. So I do have, because I'm a visual person, I do have images that I wanted to share and kind of walk you a little bit behind the scenes, and that'll help me narrate the story that I wanted to tell a little bit about how I made the film and why I made the film. And then I'll open it up to any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen right now. And so this, as those of you that have seen the film, this is my grandmother, and she was really the reason that I made this film. She was an amazing, remarkable woman. And I should say that my first foray into doing any kind of video work at all was filming my grandmother cooking. She came out to visit me for the first time from Florida. I live in California. She came out to visit me when she was 96. And for the next 4 summers, she spent the month of August with me, which it sounds like you guys are having August weather right now. But in Florida in August, it is really hot and humid. And out here in California, it's really nice and cool and wonderful. And so she made that smart decision to spend the summers out here with me. And we would cook together, and that was our thing. And I realized that the way that she showed her love was really through her cooking. And so I realized that I had grown up cooking with her, but she never wrote a recipe down. And so I realized that the way that for me to collect the recipes really was to start videoing her as she was cooking. And that was really my first foray at all into filmmaking. So I think if you have a passion for something and you really want to see it done, you can make it happen. I didn't know anything about sound or about image quality or any of that stuff. I was a still photographer, but somehow because of that love of my grandmother and wanting to capture that, her cooking, we made it happen. And when she was turning 100, she used to work out at the gym. And just for those of you that think, oh, I can't do that, she did not start working out until she was 80. So it's never too late to start something new. You can always start something new. And she actually started because my grandfather had open heart surgery. And they suggested that it'd be good for him to go to the gym. And my grandmother kind of just went along for the ride and fell in love with going to the gym. And I think it was like the social hour for her, but also it helped her stay in shape. And she realized the value of that very quickly. And I went back with her for her 100th birthday. And I thought, I've got to film this because nobody's going to believe that at almost 100, she's still doing this. And thankfully I had her mic'd, and I said, Grandma, can you give me some words of wisdom? And she said things like, be kind and live life to the limits. And I came back from that trip and I was looking at approaching 50, and I thought, I need to find other role models out there like my grandmother. At that point in the media, there really weren't positive role models for aging. I mean, it was all, any movies that I saw or anything that I saw in the news really was all the negative side of aging. And I really wanted to find people out there like my grandmother, who are living very full lives and still enjoying life, because that's what I want my life to look like. And so I sent an email blast out to my friends, family, and all the alum that I've taught over the 28 years that I've been at Cal Poly. And I said to them, I have this idea for a project. I didn't know it was going to be a film. Here's a little 1-minute clip of my grandmother at the gym. And if you have somebody like her in your life, please nominate them for this project. And I was just inundated by heartwarming nominations. I mean, it was such a wonderful gift to get these wonderful, lovely nominations from people about why they thought this person should be part of the project. And so I started filming, and I actually filmed, this is a friend of mine, Jesse Alexander, who I used to work for. He's an amazing photographer. And I filmed him first because I'd never done anything like this. So let me just say, if I can do this, you can do this too. But I just thought, I better film somebody who I know, because if I really screw it up, I know I can go back. He'll let me go back multiple times, and he can be my guinea pig. And he was just lovely. And we got through that interview, and I said, yes, I can do this. I know I can do this. And so I ended up, over a 4-year period, interviewing 40 people who were 75 and older with a collective life experience of 3,000 years. This is actually, no, we're not supposed to have favorites, but this is my favorite person, Lucky Louie. Those of you that saw the film know that he makes some mozzarellas for his daughter's deli every morning. Just an amazing, amazing guy. And I feel like one of the best things that I got from doing this project was that I ended up with 40 new grandparents, and what a wonderful gift my grandmother gave me in being able to do that. This is me filming Emily Cleaves, who she calls herself a yogini. I do this Bikram yoga. It was really important for me to interview somebody that was still doing that. I didn't know that whole other story that she said about leaving Riga, Latvia, or any of that. And so I learned that along the way. And I think that one of the things that I learned that was really important, when you're interviewing somebody, allow for those pivot moments to happen. For me, that was when I was interviewing Emmy, for sure, because here I was interviewing her because she does the yoga that I do. And then she had this incredible story of her surviving World War II and how she was able to do that. And her being left on the train platform, and the train taking off with her mom, and she was by herself. And I often think back about these people and their lives, and what was I doing at that age, and how would I have reacted at that time? And it just, it's remarkable. This is Blanche Brown, who, by the way, is still teaching. That she teaches Afro-Haitian dance through ODC, which is in San Francisco. And she's still, through the pandemic, been teaching that every week online. So if you ever wanted to take an Afro-Haitian dance class, you too can do that from wherever you are, because she's online. And she's an amazing quilter. She made my favorite mask for me, which has butterflies on it. And I love it. So I wear that all the time, and I think of her. So like I said, I have 40 new grandparents. I get a really wonderful mask from Blanche. Susie Edo Bauman, who, she is still alive. She's 101 now. And she was one of the people whose stories I actually sought out, because I felt like when I did realize that I was going to do a film, there was this aha moment when I went, okay, this is something more than just a web series. This really needs to be a film, so it'll get out there in a bigger way. I realized that I wanted to be sure that I was telling a diverse group of stories. And I really wanted to tell the story of the Japanese internment in our country, because I felt like it was very easy to tell the story of World War II and kind of forget about that, and focus it more on what happened in Europe. But I also want to tell about what happened in this country. And so that became very important for me to find somebody that could tell that story. And then I think this got a little bit, a little bit screwed up here, but we went, I had a really wonderful time at lots of film festivals. We got into a whole bunch of film festivals with the film, and it was at that point we were in person, and that was lovely, and won lots of awards. But one of my favorite things was going to the Girl Scout convention with Rose Albano Ballestero, who she talked about being the only Latino in her Girl Scout troop, and what a difference that made in her life. And I was a brownie when I was a kid. So this was one of my proudest moments, was going to the annual Girl Scout convention. You can see Rose here with two of the big wigs from the Girl Scouts, and she got to share her story with the Girl Scouts. And that was just like one of my favorite moments with a film. And then this is me when we did have a theatrical release. And this was our local theater. We screened all over the country. But this was here in San Luis Obispo. We held for 9 weeks, which is unheard of. And I just can't believe I was on the marquee with all those great Oscar nominations there. And then we screened through AARP's Movies for Grown-Ups. And, you know, we've done a lot with the film, which has been wonderful. But the greatest gift that this film has given me is the friendships that I've made with these amazing, amazing people that were in the film, who I probably would never really have known otherwise. And I'm still really good friends with all these people. And I just feel so fortunate that I had that opportunity. We don't often take the time to put away our devices and just really talk and listen to people. And I was given this gift. I gave myself the gift of really taking 4 years to put everything away and just really connect with people. And I would say that, you know, one of my mottos is that everyone has an amazing story to tell if we just take the time to listen. We don't often do that. And so I think that it's so important to make the time for that. And really out of that came these projects that I'm now doing, all these intergenerational projects. So I teamed up with a professor here at Cal Poly who teaches a class in the psychology of aging. And we put together a learning module where we show the film to older adults and to students. And then they use the questions that I used during the film. And they ask each other questions. So it's bilateral. And they spend the whole quarter or semester, depending on what school it's in, really getting to know each other. We've been doing this in the virtual environment as well. We've been working with Senior Planet in Colorado, which is part of AARP now. And they get to know each other a little bit, and they get to, you know, really get to understand each other. And what I always say is that through this project, we're combating ageism one story and one connection at a time. And I think it's really hard to have an ism about or a stereotype about another group of people if you know somebody from that group of people. And that's true for different ages. And that goes in both directions. And it's been really wonderful to see the connections that have been made. And, you know, one of my favorite things is in this virtual world, one of the students that we were working with said to me, sent me an email and said, you know, I really have to thank you because this is the first friend that I've made during the pandemic. And that really hit me because they, you know, everybody's isolated. People didn't have that opportunity, and they got to really meet somebody in a very unique sort of way. And this is just one image with my grandmother and I at the center, and just a whole bunch of the connections. This is just a small fraction of the connections that we've made through doing these intergenerational projects. And I'm very happy to announce that the film is going to be on PBS in September. And PBS Learning Media is picking this up, and we're going to do part of the big push for PBS Learning Media is doing these intergenerational projects, but then it will also lead to doing some very historical references like the Japanese internment or civil rights or those kind of things as well. But we're starting out with the intergenerational connections, because one of the things that I learned in my research for doing the film, I found this quote from the Huffington Post. And it was that the last 100 years is the first time in human history that we've looked to anyone other than our elders for advice. And I personally feel like the world is really suffering as a result. So whatever I can do to bring the generations together, I was lucky enough to have my grandparents, to live with them, to have them close at hand, to have them live long enough for me to really appreciate that. But not everybody has that. In fact, most people don't. And we're so isolated in terms of our different segmented populations that to bring the generations together and to have us learn from each other, I think that that's a real gift that we need to do more of. So with that introduction, I can open it up to questions, or I don't know, Bob, if you have some questions you want to ask, or open it up to everyone as a group, however you'd like to do it. You're muted, Bob.
You're absolutely right. Year and a half, I still haven't figured that out. Let's open it up to the group first. Does anybody have any questions? Maybe just, I'm gonna put it on gallery here. Go ahead, Brenda.
How did you choose the people that you had in your book?
Yeah, that's a good question. Initially I put a call out to, like I said, my friends, family, and alum. And the first group of people really came from that call. And then I have to admit that my partner, he is a podiatrist, or he's retired. And he had some really good, he introduced me to Lucky Louie, which was wonderful. And then I had specific people that I really wanted to tell their story. Like I knew I wanted to have the Japanese American story. I also knew that I wanted to have like Rose's story. It was really important to have a Latino story as well. And so I did seek some of those out. One thing that I will say is that was an interesting challenge for me, because to go from being a still photographer where I had worked for magazines, as Bob said, and doing that kind of work, real easy to take a still image of somebody and then they could have a really good story in written form, but much more difficult when you're trying to capture them on film. And if they can't tell the story, then they really didn't make the final cut of the film. So there were a lot of people that ended up on the cutting room floor, not because they didn't have a good story, but because they couldn't necessarily tell it. I mean, I interviewed a really wonderful Japanese American man. Normally, and I should say, normally before I interviewed people, I would just go and have a cup of coffee with them or tea and just get to know them without any cameras, and just to kind of go over what we were going to do, and just so that I could develop a relationship, because there was a lot of trust that had to go on with that and with the questions that I was asking. This particular gentleman, because he lived far away from me, he was a friend of a friend's dad, and I just trusted that and she said, oh, he's great. And I went up there and he was monotone, dressed in a monochromatic outfit. His walls were gray behind him. I mean, so I as soon as I started talking to him, I knew he was not, he had a great story, but he just couldn't tell it. So I did the interview. I spent a couple of hours with him, did the interview. And I gave it to, and I transcribed it. I transcribed everything, and I gave it to his kids so that they have that as a legacy for them. But I just knew he wasn't going to make the final cut of the film. And I think that unfortunately that is, as a filmmaker, you do have to kind of think about that, because you do want to keep your audience engaged. And if the story is good, but somebody can't tell it, it's going to fall flat and people will turn it off. So that was also a little bit of how I had to, think about, well, who's going to be good at telling the story? And some stories, there were very similar stories. And so I had to pick who I felt was like the best person that was telling that story.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Hi, go ahead, Beth.
Well, you had a lot of wonderful historical footage with all the stories, and it was just marvelous from that standpoint. I'm wondering how you got all that. Did the people you interviewed have access to it, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I felt like it should not just be a talking head. That would get very boring very quickly. And so I felt like having that historical footage was really important to put it into context. So to answer your question, some of the people had a little bit of home movies, but like all of that footage for Susie's piece, which is the Japanese internment, that was actually a film that our government put together on how wonderful it was that we were interning a group of our own people. And so because it's part of our National Archive, that was available and accessible for me to use. You can use that for free. In contrast to that, the story of Marion Wolf, when she is getting off of the Kindertransport, for those of you that might not have seen the film, she was on the very first Kindertransport out of Vienna, Austria, where the Quakers in the United Kingdom were trying to save Jewish children in Germany and Austria, and they did rescue 10,000 kids. And she was on the very first one out of Vienna, Austria. So she knew that there was a team there that was filming that. It was the Hearst Corporation. And we had to hunt that down. We had to hunt that footage down. And she had seen it. There was another film out called Into the Arms of Strangers, which is all about the Kindertransport. She's in there for 4 seconds, and she had just seen that little blip of her. So we contacted the historic picture researcher for that film, and she said, oh, this was it. And anyway, long story short, we had to get it from UCLA Film Archives, owns it. That was $90 a second with a 30-second minimum. So you can multiply out some of that historical footage, not all of it, but there was quite a bit that we had to pay for. And, I would, if anyone looked at my Google searches, like I was typing in things like internment, Nazi camps, it's pretty, I hope nobody's looked at any of those searches that I was doing, but we had to find that, and we had to find the rights, who owned that. There was some footage that we used in Emmy's piece, Emmy Cleaves's piece. And I tracked it back to this woman who lived in Russia. It was her dad's footage. and I had to wire money to Russia, and I had to go into Bank of America and say, I want to wire money to Russia. I've never seen a bank manager come out of her office so fast. But that was part of the process, was, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and making sure we had the rights to use all that imagery. So, and that was part of the fun of putting it together, was trying to fit all those pieces together so that it really showed the story. And I think that that's why it will be very successful in classrooms, because there's nothing like a firsthand account. There is something of, you read something and in a textbook and you learn about it in one way, but like when you hear Susie Edelbauman talking about from her own perspective what it was like to be in an internment camp, it just changes everything. And so I think that it will be a very effective educational tool for that reason. Thank you.
Norm.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Well, I was just really impressed by this documentary. I had to watch it in increments due to my schedule this weekend with my daughter, her husband, and grandkids here, but I did watch the whole thing. And I couldn't look, and I could hardly wait to get to the next segment. It was that interesting to me. So it's very, very well done. Here's my question, and you've kind of answered it in one way, because you mentioned about the financial part. That is something really that is out there for whatever we do. My question is barriers. How did you overcome other barriers that you came across? Finances may be one of them. And I'm going to just stop there and let you answer the question. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think I have always been a person who, instead of saying why, I say why not. So I'd never done a film before. Well, why not? I think if you're passionate about something, you can make it happen. I also have no problem admitting that I don't know what I'm doing and asking other people for help. And, I find people who are doing what I want to be doing and they're doing it really well. And I reach out to them. And if, half of them answer me back, then that's great. And I found that in the filmmaking world, that was definitely the case, that it was really easy to reach out to people and say, I love what you're doing. And I'm earlier on in the phase of what I'm doing. What advice can you give me? People love to talk about that, but it's, for me, I love collecting stories and listening to people. So it was a win-win situation where I could learn from people. And again, I wasn't afraid to admit that I didn't know something and I didn't know how to do something. And I think that's the hardest thing. A lot of people don't want to feel like there's, like they don't know something. So they feel like it's an advantage to say that they know more than they do. I'm of the opposite extreme. I say, nah, teach me about it. I don't even going through this PBS process. I was on a call this morning and I said to the guy, I've never done this before. And can you help me? Like, what program would you use? How would you do this? And so we have a motto here at the university that I teach at. It says, it's called learn by doing. And I feel like I have lived that motto in working on this film. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've done a lot of things that I did wrong, but a lot of things that I just blundered through and did it right. And I think when you're passionate about something, it was never about the money for me. It was always about this passion of my love for my grandmother, which I think is partly why people really opened up their stories in the way that they did, because they knew why I was doing this film was from the heart. And I think if you follow your passion, you will never go wrong. And in terms of the money, I've never let money stop me from doing anything. In the beginning, I was trying to write grants and do proposals, and I was spending so much time on that I wasn't working on the film. And then I realized, I have 2 grown kids, I have a big house, and I thought, I'm going to rent out my house through Airbnb. And that is how I afforded to pay for the film. So I just say, think outside the box. It wasn't a traditional way to fund a film, but I also don't have any investors that could tell me, you should edit this, you should do that. I was my own guide in terms of how I did things and in terms of how I've distributed the film and gotten it out there in the world. So I can give it to universities for free if I want to, because to do these intergenerational projects. And I can make some choices like that I would not have been able to make had I had investors on board and did it in a more traditional way. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but great. Thanks, Norm.
Philomena.
Yeah. Sky, thank you so much for your work And I love that the impetus was your grandparents, and their influence on your life. My mom is from Ireland. I didn't meet my Irish grandparents until I was 21 and visited them in Ireland for the first time. And they were amazing storytellers, guys. So I just believe that there is such power in us understanding our family story to better understand who we are. And I just also appreciate the intergenerational conversation, because I think you're absolutely right. So my question is, with the sessions that you've observed or heard about responses, what has been an unexpected learning of this intergenerational conversation of people who've participated so far?
Well, I could tell you a very personal story, and I think it applies to a lot of the students as well. I had a student. I would try and bring a student along with me on these when I did these interviews, mostly so that they could carry gear, but also just learn from what I was doing. And I had this student who has since become a very good friend and has graduated many years ago, James. And he went on the interview with me with Lucky Louie, and Louie could talk. And we went out to lunch after we did the interview, and James said to me, "Wow, I never knew that older people could talk so much and had such interesting stories." And I said to him, I mean, and he was very, I had known him for years. He was a senior at that point. I'd known him for 4 years. And he was very serious about it. And I said, "Well, James, don't you have an older adult in your life?" And he said, "Yeah, I have a grandfather, but we really have never had a conversation, an in-depth conversation." And I said to him, "Look, it was right around Thanksgiving. I said, "You're going home for Thanksgiving. Is your grandfather going to be there?" "Yes." "Okay, so you're my student. You're going to take these questions that we just asked Lucky Louie, and you're going to use them, and you're going to ask your grandfather these questions." And he came back from that trip beaming. He didn't know how to have a conversation with his grandfather. He didn't know how to start the conversation. And I think his grandfather was in the same boat. And his grandfather was tickled pink that he cared enough to ask him these questions. And it opened up this relationship that they never had before. And it was just because of that. And I hear that over and over again from the students that participate in this project, in the intergenerational project, that they are then going to apply this to their grandparents and ask them, their grandparents, these questions, because they just, one of the hardest things I think is if you sit down and you want to talk to somebody and you have an interview with somebody and you don't have a question to ask, it's like, "Okay, tell me about yourself." Well, that's so wide open that it makes it really difficult to start that conversation. And so in putting this program together and really in doing the film, I came up with this list of like 20 questions that I asked everyone the same questions, because it gave me a starting point to have that conversation. And they are on my website, and I'll include them in the wrap email that I have as well. And because I will also say that one of the questions I asked was, "Do you have any regrets?" This didn't make it into the film, but the biggest regret that people had was not asking somebody questions of somebody that had passed away. And that's a missed opportunity. And so I think, if you, even for those of you on this call, you could consider just writing the answers to these questions out, because people want to know, and they don't know they want to know until it's too late. And so again, it's just kind of a starting point to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hey, Bob, I got a question, if it's okay.
Sure.
So first of all, truly, it kept my interest for the whole time. And so I appreciate that. I was fortunate enough where I actually lived with one set of my grandparents, and I will continue to say my grandpa was my best friend and probably still is to this day. So to have these relationships are fantastic. I was also fortunate enough to have my last grandparent live until I was in my 30s. So those relationships are really, really important. My question has to do with, how did the people in your film, did they have any statements, thoughts, judgments, ideas about our younger generation that they shared, and how they felt our younger generation was coming up?
Well, I think, that's a really good question, Judy, and thank you for the kind words about the film. I think that one of the things that came up when I interviewed Jesse Alexander was this idea that everybody's on their devices all the time and that they should look up and look at the beauty around them. And to be honest, I still hear him in my head saying, look up and look at the beauty around you, because I'm guilty of that as well. I also think that there were many times when I was doing trainings and do Q&As, and people would say, oh, younger people need to see this because they have no idea, they don't go through any of these things. And the reality is that they did not go through a world war, but they are going through so many of their own things right now. And so that's why I love these intergenerational projects, because that communication is bilateral. And so the older adults have an opportunity to understand what the younger generation is going through and what they do care about. And actually, I did a film after this film called Forever Voters, and Evie Justison, who's in the film, is part of the League of Women Voters. And before the pandemic, and even during the pandemic, they've been doing it virtually, but they were going into classrooms and talking about the importance of voting and why one vote really matters, completely nonpartisan, just trying to get students to register or pre-register to vote. And I was so inspired by that I said, Evie and I had coffee, and she was telling me about what she was doing. And I said, I have to find out who's in charge. And by the end of the week, I was in a classroom filming, because I was so inspired by the fact that that was going on. I mean, I remember, in the film, my grandmother talks about not having the right to vote. And in our household, that was so vitally important. And nobody talked about who you voted for. It was that your vote counted and you should go vote. And so anyway, when I did that, I also was filming the students and filming them about what was important to them and why did they want to vote? What were the things that were on their minds? And interestingly enough, in the middle of doing the filming, there was an announcement that came on from the principal, and he said, we're getting a lot of calls today that something's going to happen, and please disregard that. Please don't, upset your parents or whatever. And that was a little bit odd. And then later on, there was a football rally. It was a Friday, and there was a football rally. And right after the football rally, I was interviewing another student, and the fire alarm went off, and no one moved. Why? Because they were afraid that it was a shooter on campus. And it just was this chilling moment where I realized, wow, I never had to think about that when I went to school. And these students, that's something that's in their consciousness, that they have, shooting drills, and they have climate change, and they have all these things that I didn't have to deal with. So I think it was really, that's what I love about these intergenerational projects, is because there is that communication back and forth. And I think that is vitally important, so that we really understand each other, and so that there's less divisiveness. It's not you versus them, it's we're all in it together. And I think that that's what's really important.
I think Karen has been trying to ask a question.
Yep.
Thanks,
Karen,
Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. I think you've got an audience here of people who would like to tell their stories. And I'm wondering what you learned about what makes a good storyteller. You have good questions, that's important, but there are also, could you give us some tips about what it means to tell a good life story?
Nobody's actually ever asked me that question before, Karen. That's a great question. I think that it's really, how do I say this in the nicest way? Brevity is a good thing. You don't want to get too long, because people will drop off after a certain amount of time. I think also, as Marian always says to me, humor is really important. And I think that one of the things that I tried to do in each of the stories that I was telling was that there was a poignant moment, a word of wisdom, and then a humorous moment. And I think that levity helps people stay engaged, because if it's all heavy, it's too much for people. And so I think having, it's a balance. So when you're telling your story, if you can interweave a little bit of levity, I think that always goes a long way, along with some words of wisdom. I think that's, and not making it preachy, but just, again, I always say, it's like, this is my approach to things. It doesn't have to be yours. So I think that's that's really an important key as well. But you'd be surprised. People are, I mean, maybe it's just me. I happen to be very curious about people's stories, and I want to know more. And I want to know, everyone has at least one really interesting thing that happened to them in their lives. So I think if you can start with that maybe and work your way around that, I think that that's a good place to start.
Karen,
I
you're
have
still,
one other question, kind of a follow-up, because interviewing is really hard. That's what I did a lot of it in when I was working. And interviewing to get at a story is even harder. So I'm curious about how you use, I mean, I understand why you wanted to have 20 questions that everybody answered. How did you use, what kind of interviewing strategies did you use to get people to tell you more when you felt they hadn't gone far enough?
Yeah, that's also a good question. Well, let me just say that I had never done interviewing before this project. So I definitely was learning as I was going on, and I became a better interviewer as I did more of these interviews. I think it's like anything else, practice is really important. And I was practicing my skill of interviewing. So in the beginning, I was so nervous that I would just stick to those 20 questions and I would never ask the follow-up question. And I would get back from the interview and I'd be listening to it and I go, why didn't I ask the follow-up question? Like, this is such an obvious follow-up question. And I also, my stepson was in news. He was a producer for the evening news. And he would tell me, listen for the soundbite. And so I started getting better at listening for what the soundbite could be, because sometimes people will say something great, but they'll run on and you can't use it. And so now you're going to know one of my tricks would be if somebody said something amazing, but they just kept running on, I would say, oh, that was amazing. Can you say the part about this? I messed up my sound gear and I'm so new at this and I just want to make sure I get it right. And I'm going to re-record it. So I would always put the onus on me, not on the person that I was interviewing. I would say it was my fault. I messed this up and what you said was amazing. Can you repeat it and maybe just say this little part? And that usually helped me get the soundbite that I needed, because you do start learning how to, you said you interview people. So you do start learning to listen for that soundbite and what you can use and what is going to be superfluous. And that is interesting to that person that's telling the story, but not going to be interesting to people listening to the story. So I think as you do it more, you get a little bit better at knowing when those moments are. And if you don't feel like you captured it, you just do it again. And my grandmother was so patient with me because I would film her. I did these cooking videos, which if any of you are really interested, it's called, I did a little series called Cucina Nonna, which is Grandma's Kitchen in Italian. And poor thing, I would make her do it over and over again until I felt like I got it right. And I would say, okay, Grandma, one more time with enthusiasm. And she would just like by the end say, okay, this is the last take. This is it. I can't do it anymore. And, but I think that that's my perfectionist style coming out, is that I wanted to make it as engaging as I could for people. And so, I mean, I remember going back and in the film, there was one line that I just needed to get clarified with that Marion Wolf needed to say. I mean, it just didn't make sense the way I was putting it together. And there was just one line that I needed to record. And I love Marion. We're having dinner tomorrow night, Marion, Paul, and I. But she likes to argue, and we spent 45 minutes trying to figure out why she needed to say this extra line. And then she finally said it. I finally was able to record her and I put it in and I showed her while I was there and she said, oh yeah, that's much better. But I think that having patience and knowing what your ultimate goal is and what you're going to do with that interview, I think is also really important. So that can kind of structure how you do it as well and how you ask those follow-up questions, but don't be afraid to ask the follow-up questions and to pivot. I mean, that was what happened with the interview that I did with Emmy when she started talking about the story of leaving Riga, Latvia. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not prepared for this. I did research on everybody that I interviewed, but that never came up. She really hadn't told that story before. And it was like, okay, pick your jaw up off the floor now and just go with it, because let the camera roll. Let it keep going because it's free to keep rolling and recording. And then you can just edit down what you need when you're done in the editing room. Better to do that than to turn it off and be really upset that you didn't capture that one last story that people told. And I think the other thing is leave moments of silence. So a lot of times in that moment of silence, don't cut people off, let them keep talking, because in those extra moments is sometimes when the best story comes out.
Sky, I've got a question. I have a small business background, and I always referred to that space between, okay, I'm going to do a project, I've got it ready to go, and success as that, then a miracle happens, right? Could you tell us about that experience of, okay, I've got the film, it's in the can, I really like it, I think it's good. Between that and then a miracle happens and the whole world loves it. There had to be a lot of work that went into marketing, promoting, getting it in front of people.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you, I mentioned that I took 4 years interviewing 40 people. So that was the interview process. And then I did a sneak preview of the film. It was really important for me to get it on the big screen so that the people that were in the film could see it. And thankfully, the San Luis Obispo Film Festival, who I knew the film director at the time, was willing to take a chance on a sneak preview and on a rough cut. And we screened the film in the biggest theater we have here, 850 people, sold out crowd. I think 200 of the people were Lou Tadon's family. And we had a great screening, standing ovation at the end. 27 of the 40 people that I interviewed were in the audience with their family members. And that was really what was important to me. But I knew that the film wasn't really done. I mean, I knew that it was a rough cut. And so I gave out feedback forms, and also had a link where people could do something online, a feedback form online. And because it was a hometown crowd and people, and I really stressed when we did the Q&A, please fill out these feedback forms, be brutally honest. I need to know. We got 200 responses, and I took another year and reworked the entire film based on those responses. And I think that was really important because I wanted to make the film the best that it could possibly be. It was great to watch it with an audience. Any of you that are filmmakers, it's really different to watch it at home versus with an audience where you can feel where people are really into it or where they're not. And that was a really important step for me. And then when we got into the Santa Barbara Film Festival that following year, that's when I knew the trajectory for the film had totally changed, and that was going to open up a ton of doors, because that's a pretty big film festival. And we got theatrical distribution shortly after that. And then the PBS thing is going to be another trajectory change as well. So there's been a lot of steps along the way that have led to different doors opening and really exciting things happening. But I think the biggest thing was being able to put the film out there and being open to feedback and being willing to change it and rework it and kind of go back to the drawing board in some cases and really create the film that I knew I could create if given the time.
Wow. Wow. So was there one connection in there that one person who was able to open up kind of the world to you, or at least a lot of doors that opened up other doors?
No, I think, one of the things that people say about me is that I am persistent. And I'm also my partner calls me the Kibbutznik kid, which is I love bringing people together, and I have a great network of people. So whenever I reach out to people all the time, I let them know what's going on. And I think that network definitely helps. I mean, I have not done any PR really for the film at all. The film has been a total word of mouth film. It's like people see it, they love it, they want somebody else to see it. And that's the best PR that you could have, is to have other people love it so much that they want to bring other people in. Or the same thing with the intergenerational projects. People, are part of that and they say, oh my God, this is the best experience ever. I need to bring in this other organization and work with them. And so, that word of mouth, it's just like anything else. That's the best way to get the word out there about what you're doing.
Wonderful. Brenda, did you have a question?
Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the ratio of men to women represented in your documentary, but did you get more women, whatever you called it when people sent in their thing for your film?
It was about half and half, but I will say women are better storytellers for the most part. Lucky Louie is an exception to that rule. He's a good storyteller. But I would say that there were more women who could tell the story better than men. And I'm not sure exactly why that was, but I would say that the nominations were about equal.
Okay. And, you know, traditionally women outlive men. And so then did you get a sense for which gender was doing better, you know, when you talk to all these people? Because, you know, there were really strong women. Well, the men were strong too that were represented, but
No,
that
you know, I would say more than that. There were three things that all the people had in common that were in the film. The most important, I think, was a sense of purpose. I think that we all need to have a sense of purpose. And I think that one thing that happens when people retire, many times they lose their sense of purpose. And everyone in that film had some sense of purpose, whether it was waking up and making mozzarellas for their daughter's deli, or in Rose's case, teaching ESL every morning. It didn't matter. That sense of purpose was vitally important. And I think the second thing was having a good sense of community. And it didn't necessarily have to be family, it could be friends, but not being a loner necessarily. Even in this pandemic time, for example, Paul Wolf, Marion turned 90, and he figured out how to have a surprise Zoom birthday party for her. And he still has his coffee group that he meets with every week on Zoom. And so, you know, having that connection, I think, is really important. And then thirdly is really the attitude that these people had. And it's, you know, this is a cliche, but there's a reason it's a cliche. They all saw life as the glass is half full rather than half empty. And so they were able to look back on their things that happened to them and look at it as a positive rather than a negative. And I think that our resilience and the way that we look back on things is really important. I mean, Abby Justison talks about reading Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and how important that was in her life, because what she got out of reading that book was that there are many times in your life that you can't control the things that are happening around you, but what you can control is the attitude about how you're dealing with those things. And this pandemic is a perfect example of that. You know, none of us can control that. We are all collectively going through this, but what we can control is our attitude. And look at all of you are on a Zoom call about this, right? You could have chosen not to participate and not to be part of something this morning, but instead you chose to be part of something. And so again, that's our attitude and how we deal with life. That is actually, I think, more important than just about anything else, is our attitude about how we deal with things.
Cool. Any other questions for Sky?
I'm just going to ask a follow-up to what she just talked about, which is, how has this changed you?
Well, I mean, I think that, like I said, I have 40 new grandparents, which is really pretty damn cool. You know, I have just great role models, and I am not sure how I would have gotten through this pandemic without having done this project. I mean, I really definitely think it reframed my attitude about a lot of things. And I also think that I live more in the moment. I think that Blanche Brown talked about living in the moment and really appreciating every moment. And I do think that since I did this film, that I take that time to, like, I'm so appreciative of this morning and having this time with you all together here. And I just think I'm more grateful than I was in the past. And I've slowed down a little bit more. I mean, my life is still very full, but I guess I've slowed down to really appreciate things a little bit more. And I think that for me, I mean, I guess I got this from my grandmother, was always just to be kind, and that kindness goes such a long way. And that was also instilled in me through all the people that were in the film. They're all very kind, giving people, and that those gifts come back to you in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine. And I think that that's, you know, for the rest of my life, that's how I hope to live my life, is just to be kind, be the best person that I can be, and be kind to others. Yeah. And Susan did
take more photographs.
And take more photographs, yes. And Susan did put a question in the chat directly to me, which was, in the intergenerational sessions, do the students of any age tell stories about their grandparents and the influence they were? I find the connection with your grandmother and your story I would like to hear more about. The students don't necessarily tell stories about their grandparents because they're connected with another older adult. And I think that it's a good thing for them to be connected with a different older adult necessarily than their grandparents, because it breaks down more stereotypes for them. And then they can go back and, like I said, use the questions with their grandparents. And then I'm not sure if you're asking, Susan, you want to hear more about my connection to my grandmother or not, but I can tell you this, I'm very close to all of my grandparents. My grandfather on my dad's side died when I was 12. I tried to ask him questions about his upbringing. He came from the Polish-Russian border and they were escaping the pogroms, and he just was too emotional to ever really talk about it. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't go there. And I think that's also okay to honor the fact that some people cannot access those memories. It's just too painful. And so, I honored that. But I do feel like I've missed that part of my history because it's also my history, but I also had to honor his pain and to not delve there. My other grandparents I was super, super close to. And I kind of took for granted that everybody had that closeness with their grandparents. And then, there was a moment where I realized, oh my God, my grandmother never even knew her grandparents because her parents immigrated to this country and she was born here. She was, I guess they had been here for a couple of years and she never met her grandparents. And that kind of blows me away that she never had that closeness or that bond to her grandparents. I think Philomena, you were talking about, you didn't meet your grandparents till you were in your 30s or 20s. And I just feel so lucky that I have them there. And my great grandmother lived to be 97. I was 19 when she passed away. And I do think it changed my life. And we live with my grandparents. For any of you that are Italian, you know that on Sundays, the whole day is based around your Sunday dinner. And my grandparents' friends would come over and I was friends with them. And so I just never even thought twice about having older friends. And one time when I asked my grandmother, what was her best advice for staying, the active and the way she was, she said, always make younger friends. And so I have friends of all ages. And I think that that's really important as well, is to have friends of all ages. It really enriches your life in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine. I'm lucky enough to work with students who are in their 20s, but I definitely have friends of all ages. So, Susan, I hope that answered your question.
Any other questions for Sky?
I'd like to ask something. Sky, you mentioned that you were just always curious. I don't see that curiosity in my grandchildren, even though I'm around them a lot. And I have stories that I would like them to know of my grandparents. How do you encourage them to want to know more about family?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that's a hard one to answer because I don't think you can force something on someone that's just not going to happen. I think that one of the things might be sharing photographs, maybe writing out a couple of stories so that they can read it on their own so they don't feel like they're trapped. I think, again, maybe having this list of questions that you can use and maybe ask them questions about them too, because I don't know, how much do you really know about them on a personal level? Like they may feel like you don't really know them, even though you think you do. And so I think doing these questions both ways, like saying, can we carve out a half an hour to ask each other these questions, and making it more of a dialogue rather than, that's bilateral rather than in just one direction. I think that that's one way to approach it, where if they know you're truly interested in them, then they will be truly interested in you. And I think that that's really important, doing it in both directions.
So what's next on your list, Sky?
Well, I've done, as I mentioned, I did the short film on Forever Voters, and I also did another short film called Mochisuki, which is the Japanese tradition where families get together the week between Christmas and New Year's, really to bring in the new year, and they make mochi, which is not what you see in Trader Joe's. It's a whole process of pounding rice. It's really beautiful, and making these mochi balls. And I was lucky enough to film Susie Edelbauman's family. 150 people gather every year. I filmed it for 2 years in a row. And so I think that the next feature film, that's a short film that's going around the film festival circuit right now. And I will send a link to that so you all can see it if anybody's interested. And I think the next feature film will be all about these traditions through food and through how we connect generations together, and how that knowledge passes down from one generation to the next, especially when we're cooking. Because for me, that was when the best stories came out with my grandmother, was when we were in the kitchen together. And so to bring the generations together and show that through food, and then also talking about, our country is a country of immigrants, and what are some of those traditions that we have kept even as we have come to this country. I think that there's a lot of things that can be interwoven into that film. So I see Mochisuki as kind of the very beginning, the tip of the iceberg for another feature film.
Cool. Brenda, did you have a question?
Yeah, I kind of forgot what it was, but sometimes I feel like, during this pandemic, people are kind of looking at how authentic their relationships are with each other. And sometimes I think with older people, especially if they live alone, they don't have the space to talk to people. So then it ends up being like a monologue when you do talk to them. And I think, I'm aware of that. So it's like their space, look at how they've lived kind of thing. But, and then the other thing I was going to say is I think that the millennials and older people have a lot in common, because right now I just read something and it really resonated with me, where this millennial is going, I'm tired of hearing how lazy and no good millennials are. I have 3 degrees, and when I get out of college, I get a job that I'm lucky to make $15 an hour. And people say that I'm lazy, or I have 3 jobs just to support myself. And then I look at, our whole cultural environment politically and everything, and how scary it is for these younger people to not know what's coming up. And I know in our household, we had to stop talking about some of that stuff with my daughter, because she goes, Dad, I have to still live here, not in our house, but live in this environment. So it was dicey times before when they were younger, and our younger people are facing up to a lot of this now. And it isn't because they don't have good, they want to succeed. It's not like they're being lazy or sitting back or something. It's just a very hard environment now. Now, with the way house prices are and everything, it's like, it's hard to look ahead. It's hard to look over their shoulder and say, man, what's going to happen, with them? Will they be able to afford to buy a house? Everything, it's just so uncertain. So I think there's a lot of commonalities between the 2 generations.
Absolutely. And I do think that it's really helpful to have the 2 generations talking to each other. I mean, I think that especially during the pandemic, the 2 generations that were the most affected by it and felt the most isolated were older adults and, like college age students. And those were the college age and high school. And so to bring those 2 groups together, I think is vitally important, because it helps both groups get through some tough times when you have a friend that you can talk to, and that you can, maybe has been through a different experience, but something similar enough that helps you realize that you can get through it too. So yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, Brenda. Donna, it looks like you have your hand up.
Do you have any ideas of how to initiate those intergenerational conversations? Are there organizations that we could look towards? Are there resources that we could utilize?
Yeah, so I do have a discussion guide, and in that discussion guide are all the questions, and I'm happy to, I'll send out my email so you can get a hold of me, and I'll send you that discussion guide. But also, like I said, in September, PBS Learning Media is going to have something on their site that people can use for free. So that's kind of a nice, and when I have that, I'll let you know. That'll be on my website and things, so people can know about that. But I think the easiest thing is, we were able to do it through classes. A lot of classes in psychology of aging are interested in doing that, or high schools I've had interested in doing that. K through 12 has this terrible project about like dress like a 100-year-old. And I'm trying to, after the 100 days of school, and I'm trying to convince a number of those schools instead to do something like this, which is far more meaningful. So I think that the platform is there. The learning module is there. If a teacher is interested, it doesn't take that much work. There's always older adults that want to participate, and it's really easy to connect people, especially now that a lot of this can happen via Zoom. Like I said, we did this last year all through Zoom. So all the conversations happen through Zoom, and our big wrap party at the end happened through Zoom. So it's very easy to make something like this happen. It's just a matter of connecting organizations and finding organizations in your area that might be interested in working on something like this.
Brenda?
Several years ago, my mother-in-law was invited to a math class at the university, and the professor and she got to be really good friends. But the whole purpose of it was that, you know, this professor wanted these younger students to get some idea of what, you know, her past math or whatever was. And it turned out to be a really good experience, and it happened more than one semester. And then I have another friend who took a class, a writing class, and she said, well, when I took this class, I felt like, well, this old girl has more to say than what you would think. And when she took a second class, a lot of those students were in her class. And when it came to getting into small groups, they go, oh, I want to be with her. I want to be with her, you know, so it was good for her and the students. So I think one of the ways to do it, and it would be some of those adult classes that, you know, in Minnesota, we can take classes for no charge, or $10 a credit or something. And I haven't done any of those in person yet because I haven't found any that, you know, resonate with me exactly at the right time that I can take them. But I think that's a good way to keep with younger people.
Absolutely.
Sky, you may not be aware that in Minnesota, we have kind of a unique situation. Anybody over the age of 62 can go to any state-run institution for free.
Wow.
Free means audit. To do it with for credit, even towards a degree, is $20 a credit. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for older adults. I have a question for you. Did you get any sense of how aging is evolving? I mean, my sense is, and maybe this is just a snapshot through the film, that it's getting, and I mean this in the most positive way, that it's getting louder, where people as they got older sort of faded away into the sunset, if you will, and a lot of people just didn't give that a lot of thought. Is there a change occurring that you had a sense of through the work you did on this film, where aging is maybe coming out of the darkness and into the light in any way, shape, or form, and becoming at least on the path to more integration into the bigger community?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things my grandmother used to say is age is just a number. And I think what she meant by that is that she never let her age define what she could and could not do. And I think that we're finding that as you know, in particular, we have a generation that's aging. We have a huge bubble of people that are aging. I think, I forget what the number is of people that are turning 65 every day right now. And as that happens, I remember, you know, my great grandmother looked the same from the time that I remember her till the time she died. And she just dressed like an old woman. And that was just kind of like what was expected at that time. And I think of, like, my mom now is 78. She doesn't dress the way I remember my grandmother or my great grandmother dressing it. So actually my great grandmother, because my grandmother dressed just the way she wanted to. But I think that there was this kind of idea of, you are a certain age, you should look a certain way. And I think we're breaking all those stereotypes. And certainly the people in the film are doing that and living their lives and not thinking about, I am a certain age, so I should be acting a certain age. I am, you know, as Lou would say when he was 97, I'd ask him, well, how are you doing? He said, well, you know, it's not like when I was 95. I mean, I think, you know, he knows it's not like we don't know that our bodies are going to age and things are going to happen. But I think that there is a different expectation and a different level of what we will be able to do and what we can continue to do. And so that's wonderful for me to see, because we're all aging, you know, so we all want to look at something that's more positive than what I had seen in the past. And like I said, when I first started working on this film, there were just no role models of in the media of what positive aging was. I mean, it really just didn't exist. And that was one of the reasons that I started working on this film, was to create those positive role models, because we need more of that. We need younger not only my generation and the generation that's in their 70s and 80s to see, but we need the younger generation to see it as well, so that they know what it looks like to age positively. And I think one of my favorite campaigns that was out, I think it was Dove that did this. They said, okay, they just asked a younger person, what does a 50-year-old look like? What does a 70-year-old look like? And they would describe like this person walking with a cane or whatever. And then they would bring somebody in to the room who was that age. And you could see the young person was like, oh my God, I had no idea, you know, but again, that's why these intergenerational connections are so important, to show that we are breaking the stereotypes, and what does that mean, and how can we move forward in a more positive way and a more active way of looking at aging. And Denise, I'm sorry, you've had your hand up.
No, that's okay. Hi, I really enjoyed the film. And I've been I actually recently moved to a 55 and over community, and to show you that I thought, well, I don't want to live with a bunch of older people. I am having the time of my life. I'm enjoying their stories and connecting with new people. But I've told a few people about the film, and how can they view it? Is there a way to access it between now and when it's going to be on PBS?
So it's on, the DVD is available on the website. And
Okay.
yeah, so that's one way. And then Bob, I know there's a cost if people wanted to sign up and see it through this link, leaving it active through the end of this week. So if they wanted to do that, they could do that and sign up. And Bob, you can tell them what the charge is. I mean, you all signed up, so you know what that is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
Are there any other questions for Sky?
Norm
Go
has
ahead.
a question.
No, I just want to say one more time that this, for me personally, has been a phenomenal experience. I appreciate you taking the steps to do something outside the box, to make a difference, to really move forward on something that you probably had questions about before you began, but you seem to overcome the barriers and move forward. And I think as your audience expands, I think the benefit is going to be that more people are going to be able to benefit themselves by seeing this video. And you know, I just have a sense that if the people receive close to what I received, they're going to just get so much joy out of it. So thank you for making your dream come true for all of us, and thank you for being part of Shift today. We really appreciate your willingness to step forward, be a part of our group today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to work with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Norm. I really appreciate that. That's very sweet. Thank you. You made my day.
And Sky, I too want to just really thank you so much. And I had the opportunity to see the film and help be a facilitator at another group's orientation on this. And again, every time I watch it, it just brings smiles to my face. It really is something that you captured the essence of everything you talked about wanting to do. You've done it so well. And our whole goal is to help give others that same experience, to help have a positive impact on their lives and everybody else that they touch. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Well, I think there should be a Lives Well Lived Shift edition.
I love that. Yes, and we've got folks that would definitely participate. You bet. Absolutely. Love it.
And with that, I think we can probably segue on with our day, but unless there's any last minute questions,
No, and again, I just want to say thank you all so much for doing this, for participating, for the wonderful questions and the wonderful comments. You guys all made my day. And I will get a wrap email, so to speak, out to Bob so he can send that out to all of you, which will have my contact info on there. So please do stay in touch, and you know, feel free to share your story on our website. We have a place on our website where you can share your stories, and it's been such a joy. So thank you so much for making my morning such a lovely morning.
And thank you, Sky. We're totally grateful. There was beauty in the truth of the film, great beauty in that. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you for coming out and participating in this today. I think we all grew from it, and at the very least, it had to bring a lot of joy to our lives. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
You as well.